Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's session of the Study UK Smart Talk webinar series 2021-22. Smart Talk aims to bring the best of British and Malaysian talents to give inspirational talks to young people and students and raise their awareness of the pioneering work and projects being pursued in the UK and in Malaysia. The Smart Talk webinar series is sponsored by Qatar Airways, a multi-award-winning airline recently announced as the Airline of the Year by the International Air Transport Rating Organization, Skytrax, for the 6th time, from 2011, 2012, 2015, 2017, 2019, and now 2021. The airline also won 5 additional awards, including World's Best Business Class and Airline Lounge, Airline Seat, Onboard Catering, and Best Airline in the Middle East. Powered by Qatar Airways Privilege Club, Qatar Airways' exclusive student club program is dedicated to offering you unparalleled opportunities, savings, and more so you can aim for the skies throughout your educational journey. Fly to more than 140 destinations worldwide with Qatar Airways and enjoy 1,500 bonus Q miles upon enrollment to the Qatar Airways Student Club with the promo code BCSC21 to enjoy. Sign up to these exclusive offers by visiting the Student Club page as provided in the chat box. And we will now share a video for our sponsor, Qatar Airways, to help all our students with the opportunities they can avail.
As you pursue your education, let us be part of your journey, offering you exclusive benefits designed with your travel needs in mind. Experience a journey where comfort meets impeccable service and where you can stay connected with complimentary super Wi-Fi. Explore a world just waiting to be discovered. With special fares and more, you can share the memorable milestones along the way and enjoy a Privilege Club tier upgrade as a graduation gift, plus the flexibility you need to change your plans and travel when it suits you. Welcome to our student club. Join today and aim for the skies. Let's go further together.
As countries around the globe are returning to normal, to those of you who are about to embark on your study journey, fly with the world's best airline of the year, Qatar Airways. If you are returning to campus in the United Kingdom, please do sign up for them and with them. Today, this evening, the spotlight will be on the prominent and renowned figure in investigative journalism, Ian Yee. I hope everyone is well, and thank you so much for joining what we hope will be a useful and engaging series. My name is Saman Imtiaz, and I work with the education team at British Council in Malaysia, and I'm your host for today. Just before we start, a quick bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded, and we will share it across British Council's social media channels. Please do remain on mute with your video and audio turned off for the duration of the session. To note, if you have submitted questions for our presenter and speaker today during your registration, thank you. We have incorporated your questions for the Q&A session. And last but not the least, to maximize your, to enjoy this webinar to the best possible maximum, please do maximize your device screen for the best webinar experience. For our presenter for the Smart Talk today, a brief background about Ian Yee. Ian Yee is an award-winning investigative journalist, documentary producer, and co-founder of impact media company, The Fourth. He and his team produce high-impact multimedia documentaries that not only expose social injustices, but also drive real-world change through creative solutions developed in collaboration with civil society. Ian has also been selected as an Obama Foundation Leader, Acumen Fellow, UK International Leaders Program Fellow, UNICEF National Consultant, Human Rights Measurement Initiative Ambassador, and Pulitzer Centre Advisory Committee member for the Rainforest Journalism Fund. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ian. Welcome. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Great. Before we start and request you to share your experiences about your student education journey, you do have a video that you would like to share with our audience today. Would you like to introduce us to it?
Yeah, that's right. I think just to frame the discussion we're going to have, we wanted to show an example of a piece of investigative journalism that my team and I have done. Yeah, just so that you guys get a bit of a picture, a bit of context. And the video that you're going to see is an investigation we did just before the pandemic into drug trafficking syndicates that were increasingly trafficking people through Malaysia. And what you're about to see is one of our journalists, a very, very brave young journalist who went undercover to speak to some of these drug mule recruiters and syndicate leaders. So yeah, have a look.
Thank you, Ian. Let's see a few scenes from the video.
He is a dangerous person. He is a person who can go to any extreme level. The way to approach people is he tell that it's documents. They don't even know that there's drugs in the bag. For now, maybe he doesn't know that we are doing this and all, but I'm worried that once he comes to know, he can do something to my life as well.
我那么问你要不要飞日本？
日本，你们有安排我的安全吗？
不行啊，老板特制一件衣服，那件衣服里面全部放完他们在里面的华人，你就是穿着那件衣服过来。
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ian. It's fascinating to see a slight glimpse into the kind of work you do and what you're involved with in your profession. For our audience today, let's begin with our information sharing. I request you to please start by sharing a little bit about your choices for your education and career pathway. And if you could start by giving us a little bit of information about your UK education background. Ian, I think you may be on mute. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. What was the question, Ian? My UK education, is it?
Yes, if you would like to just start off by talking a little bit about your education and your career pathway.
Sorry, I think I lost you for a while. I think it froze. So yeah, I studied at Liverpool John Moores University. Not very long. I think I was there over summer, but it definitely did have a huge, impact on the way I saw things. Especially because I think coming from a media perspective, I don't think there are many better places to learn about journalism than the UK. So I got my degree there, and the first thing that hit me when we were there is the level of press freedom there is just obviously coming from Malaysia, where we have lots of challenges, right? Not just in Malaysia, but in the broader Southeast Asian region. So to go to a society where press freedom of expression is celebrated, it's encouraged, journalists are very, very emboldened to investigate things and to uncover abuses of power, uncover whatever it is, even within their own government. Nothing is almost off limits for journalists to tackle. So that definitely had a huge impact on the way I saw, my job as a journalist, and it continues to inform, how the way I see journalism.
Thank you. And as a young student, when you were making these decisions about what profession to step into and what to specialize in, what made you choose journalism and investigative journalism in particular, in addition to how you saw that in the UK, journalism or investigative reporting was supported and emboldened?
Sure. Yeah, actually, it's a funny story because it's all by accident, which I think is the more throughout my career is just like a series of very, very fortunate incidents. Yeah. So when I was doing my diploma, that was literally the cheapest course. I come from a family that we came from a very poor background. We live in a new village, which is ironically, obviously, something set up by the British, right? It's these like new villages to kind of control the Chinese population and keep them away from the communists. And they kind of developed into ghettos by the time I was born there. So we were born with very, very little. And by the time, I needed to find a college, both my elder brothers had gone through public universities. And by the time it was my turn to go, my parents had a little bit more money, could send me to Tar College, which is obviously also, for those of you who are Malaysian, it is kind of a very affordable option. And when I went to the career day there, they're like, oh, mass comm was pretty cheap. Out of all of these, journalism is probably the cheapest because there's no lab work. You're not a broadcasting student. You don't need to use the big fancy studio. So all things considered, it seemed like a pretty decent and kind of flexible option. But I think so that's the realistic part of the story, the more pragmatic side of my story. But as I went along, genuinely, studying journalism, media with some very, very, really, really cool lecturers who believed in what I had to offer. And I started to believe that this journalism thing is important. It's not just something I had to pick. It could really help a lot of people. And I think the turning point was when I did an internship at the Star, and I wrote a couple of stories that did quite well. Couple of stories in particular were able to help certain people. People who are struggling, people who are, Star used to do a lot of stories like that where people who had, gone through accidents or who were no longer able to be breadwinners for their family, for example, you do a story to highlight that and donations start coming in. So that used to be a thing, right? Before you have your GoFundMe accounts and whatnot.
Right.
So that's when I really started to feel that journalism could be a real, genuine power for good. And by the time I went to my degree in the UK, obviously I was like, I think that just took it to the next level, that experience in the UK.
Thank you so much. It's great to know that while when you opted for mass communications, you did get a chance to intern at the Star, and you were independently working on stories, and that led you then to choose your specialization at UK. So you went on to continue with mass communications at Liverpool John Moores University. I'm sure that experience only added to the initial interest and experience you gained as an intern. Could you share a little bit about how your time at your UK university opened up additional possibilities and opportunities for you, would you say?
Yeah, for sure. I think in terms of opportunities, maybe not that much because I wasn't as active as I should have been with the Alumni Association. I only got in touch with them many years later. But I really think in terms of the education that I had, that really, changed my perspective, even as I got into work, and that led to opportunities, right? Because I was no longer content following that system, so to speak, kind of trying to challenge and push boundaries and say, we could do it differently. The things could be so different, if we had the audacity to imagine a different system, if we had the, and of course, like I always believe, like the audacity, people always talk about that, right? Be audacious, believe and hope. And that's often something that comes with privilege, right? A lot of people don't have the privilege of having that audacity, of being able to imagine a different world and stuff like that. So I had that privilege. I was able to go to the UK to see a different way of doing things, to be schooled and be taught and trained in a different way. And so I decided I have that privilege, so I need to use it for something good.
Okay. What would you say, for the benefit of the students in our audience today who are exploring journalism as a possible career and field to study, what would you say was the most important life lesson you learned through your student journey?
Wow, life lesson. I think humility.
Yeah.
A lot of things you think I think I did know. Okay, so I guess after a couple of years into my studies here in Malaysia, obviously, I do think sometimes you think you know everything, sometimes, and then you go study abroad, especially in a place like the UK, where obviously the media is a bit more developed, and there's a strong ecosystem there, and suddenly you just have to tear down everything you knew. It was a bit of a humbling experience, but at the same time, I think I don't. After that, I don't think I continue to have any of these like preconceived ideas of what the media should be, or yeah. So yeah, I think that would have been my answer.
Well, that's really interesting because earlier on you also mentioned that in your university, the experience gave you the drive to question and to change the way people do things in a particular field or industry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I feel that that's obviously tied to the privilege that I had to go somewhere else and experience something different, right? And that allowed me to kind of have those dreams, you know, versus I know there are a lot of people who struggle, and for them it is about getting by. And I came from that background, right? Like I came from that background of our family not having social security, financial security ever. We've never had that. And for me to be able to go study overseas was a huge investment. I was the first in my family to get that. And so obviously you want to make the most out of it, which comes back to that humility. So in my education journey, there were a lot of others like me as well in the UK who went with me there. And I was always so inspired by that you have some of them who had worked, you know, have done 2-3 jobs to pay for that education. And I was just always blown away. And I think that I'm not, so yeah, again, it comes back to that word, right? Privilege, right? Make the most of what you have, work as hard as you can, stay humble. It will pay off in the long run, because I know some of those people that I was there with as well. They came probably from even poorer backgrounds than me, and they made it through. They worked as hard as they could, and now they're doing well. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're involved with. Could you have been so active in advocating various journalism campaigns and issues, and taking this into consideration, what does your average typical workday involve as an investigative journalist?
It's a lot. I think what people don't realize is we do a lot of donkey work. We do a lot of grunt work, a lot of very, very boring things. People see some of the videos and they always think like we're carrying cameras around, rushing from one scene to the next.
Yeah.
That's like 5% of what we do. The other 95% is staring at computer screens, going through documents after documents after documents, lots of phone calls, mostly badgering people in power, trying to get them to respond, trying to, to hear their side of the story sometimes. So there's a lot of that. There's a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of research. And then sometimes it gets to a point where we are close to getting into production. There will be like certain weeks that we have to plan out some of the sting operations or undercover operations that we do. So usually that takes like a couple of weeks, and then it's back to the grind. It's back to calling up people who don't want to talk to you because you're a pesky journalist that is asking questions about them that they really don't want people to know about.
Right.
But also the good thing about that is there's a lot of variety to our work. So you never feel bored. You're not doing the same thing 9 to 5 and then tomorrow 9 to 5 do the same thing again. Some days it's research, some days it's shooting, some days it's undercover. And then some days you see your story finally go out after 13, 14 months of investigations, and it makes a difference, and then it's all worth it.
I was just going to ask you, and you just answered that. I was going to ask you, how long does it normally take on average, all the groundwork and preparation for a story?
It could be between it could be, sometimes it could be done in like a month for an investigation. But sometimes it's, a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah, it's crazy.
And of course, as an investigative journalist, could you share a little bit with our audience while you're working on your stories or your projects? And considering you've mentioned all the research and groundwork involved, you're working on multiple stories at a time. Yeah. Is that right? And is that the norm for most investigative journalists?
Yeah, I think so. I think for the journalists themselves, most of them, they won't have to manage multiple investigations. But for the producers, for my producers, for example, yeah, they'd be monitoring like 2 to 3 things at a time, and so some people will always say, "Oh, Rage only releases like 2 or 3 major investigations a year," but they don't realize the legwork is constant. And
Okay.
I've done daily news as well, where it's always 9 to 5.
Yeah.
You release a story or two, and then the next day you do the same thing, right? So I've done both sides, and it's hard to say which is more stressful, because obviously the news cycle is much faster, but with investigative work, you are always balancing a lot of different things, a lot of different balls. And yeah, suddenly a contact will call you out of a sudden and say, "Hey, this thing come true, this meeting that we were trying to arrange." Like, for example, I remember we were doing something about human trafficking as well. And then suddenly you get a hit, somebody's willing to meet up. Then you have to
Okay.
drop the other 2 things that you've been working on, and you just got to go, because like this other human trafficking project, we've been waiting for this call for months.
Right.
And you've got to immediately snap into it. Remember, all the background information has to be at the tip of your fingertips. All the 6, 7, 8, 9 months of research you did, you have to immediately have that back in your mind to then go in, question this person, think on your feet. So you're trying to get answers from this person while undercover, while
Right.
keeping a cover story. So my guys, they go do this undercover work. They are just absolutely brilliant. I don't know, honestly, sometimes I don't know how they do it. They are just really, really good. So we do a lot of prep work, obviously, but still, to be in that moment and to be able to pull it off is just, yeah, hats off to them.
That's amazing and fascinating, both, Ian. You have been prominent in investigative journalism in defending justice. Could you elaborate a little on that? Perhaps could you share an experience or a particular example with our audience today from your experiences as an investigative journalist?
Sure. I think in general, journalism is in service of justice, right? In general, like any form of journalism, it should be in service of social justice, because our role is as the fourth estate. And that's why my social enterprise is called the fourth, right? We need to be that fourth estate to hold the other 3 branches of government accountable, to hold the judiciary, the legislature, the executive. Yeah, they can't, obviously, you're not going to trust them to hold themselves accountable, right? That doesn't work. You're not going to trust, oh, there's separation of powers. Don't worry, the judiciary will hold the other 2. And, we've seen it time and time again, it doesn't work. So you do need that fourth power. You need that fourth estate, the media, to hold them accountable and to stand up for a just society, to make sure that the decisions that are being made by people in power are just and equitable and lead to a better society. So journalism, in essence, defends social justice. But investigative journalism in particular, why we decided to go full out in it was, I think it's just starting to become more and more difficult. I think as the traditional structures of media are kind of being disrupted by technology in good ways and bad ways. Investigative media was like the first thing to go, because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it's not immediately as clickable. You for news content, you can churn out a whole bunch of stories. It's quantity over quality. Whereas with investigative journalism, you're investing 12 months of time into a story that that will last in the public consciousness for about maybe 2 days, if that. So I think an investigative journalism is basically any type of journalism where people dig deeper, like where an issue, a form of injustice is not known to the public. You go in, you find out, you dig out the truth, and then you tell the world about it, right? So that inherently takes more time, and it is a form of journalism that is so necessary. So that's kind of why we got into it. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry,
It does part of it. It does part of it. You mentioned 2 things which I'd like to ask you a little bit more about. You said all forms of journalism should be geared towards social justice or enabling social justice. And then you also mentioned that as a journalist, you would at times work for a year or more on a story, And when the story breaks, it would last in the media cycle for about 2 to 4 days. As a professional and as a team who have worked on this, is that something that young students are looking to join this field should be mindful of? Is that what keeps you going? The social justice aspect is there. The countless groundwork that's required, but you did mention specifically that once the story breaks, 2 days, it's over. So what keeps investigative journalists or all journalists going? Where does that stem from?
Yeah, I think so. This is still very fresh in my mind because last week I had the incredible honor of moderating a forum with Maria Ressa, the journalist in the Philippines who has been actively speaking out against President Duterte's war on drugs, right? And has been calling out extrajudicial killings in the name of this war on drugs, which obviously is not a great thing, right? If you have people going around killing people without trial, whether it's in the name of clearing the streets of drugs or whatnot, that's going to be abused, right? So Maria Ressa and her team at Rappler, they have been actively pushing back against that. And because of that, they have suffered quite greatly. They've been attacked by trolls, very, very organized type of trolling on social media. And all because they want to tell the truth. They wanted to show people that, not all these extrajudicial killings, 5,000 over of them, not all of them are drug lords. In fact, very, very few of them are actually drug lords. Most of them are low-level drug addicts or pushers on the streets. They are just pawns of the real people in power, right? The kingpins. And so because of that, Maria Ressa herself, she's had a ton of lawsuits filed against her, which all seem pretty dubious if you ask me. Lawsuits on like cyber libel or whatever it is, like a whole bunch of lawsuits. And that could actually see her go to jail for the rest of her life. And because of that, in the middle of that session, I was telling you that I moderated a forum with her, right? In the middle of that session, she got a phone call telling her that she had won the Nobel Peace Prize because of her work defending press freedom. And that's just in a nutshell why we do it. Not because of the prize, but because we are defending justice, we're defending peace, the Nobel Peace Prize. They recognize her work as important because she's not just exposing, it's just not just one issue. It's not just like, the drug trafficking piece I showed earlier. It's not just drug mules. It's not just human trafficking. It is the very principle of media freedom. It's the principle of having a check and balance by a fourth estate to hold these large systems accountable. So if you ask most investigative journalists why they do it, I think that's what they'll tell you. We are holding people in power accountable. And if we don't do what we do, the extrajudicial killings will go on. The drug traffickers will get off scot-free. Human trafficking and all these issues will continue to rise. And that's why, at least that's for me. That's why I feel we need to hold the line, as Maria Ressa always says. We hold the line for truth and justice. Sometimes it feels a bit self-aggrandizing, but in the cases when people like Maria Ressa come along and you see what they've gone through in order to stand for truth and justice in her country, then you realize, no, we're not delusional here. Sometimes you ask yourself, are we really doing all this, or are we just peddling stories? Are we just storytellers and kidding ourselves? But then you see someone like Maria and everything she's given up in order to defend journalism, in order to defend truth. Then you realize that this is real. We have to keep going. We have to keep holding the line.
I think that the way you and Maria have summed it up, hold the line for truth and justice, that encapsulates it so succinctly about all the multiple dimensions that it brings to you as a professional, as an individual, as someone who's working towards this. Moving on to some of our next questions, could you talk a little bit about what are some of the common obstacles, challenges on both perspectives? For somebody who's just starting to get into the field, students who may be getting ready, who may still be studying, what are some of the obstacles and challenges they should be prepared with? And then once in the field, how does that change a little? Because I'm sure there's multiple kinds of challenges coming at you from all directions.
Yeah, I think for someone who's just entering the industry, or if you're still a student, I would say manage your expectations. It's not all glitz and glamour. It's not all investigative work. There's a lot of very important beat reporting that needs to be done. So beat reporting is like doing the crime beat, doing the court beat. So it's like departments, kind of, so to speak. So if you're on a court beat, you're going to court every day, trying to find the most interesting court cases, which are important. So in Malaysia for now, the court beats it's always, 1MDB and stuff like that. So people need to know. There needs to be an independent journalist there to monitor proceedings and tell people what happened. If not, nobody's going to know about it, and nobody will be able to hold them accountable for how that case goes on, right? So that's important. So there is a lot of like I was saying, like a lot of grunt work, a lot of donkey work you got to do before you get to that level where you become like a columnist. Everybody thinks like, oh, I'm gonna be like Carrie Bradshaw or whatever. It's not all that at all. And it takes a very, very long time to even get the chance to write an opinion piece, let alone hold a column. At least in the past, not everybody gets to write an opinion piece, right, these days. Yeah. But last time you have to prove that you know an issue well enough that you can speak it from a point of expertise. That you speak regularly to other experts that informs your opinion. So that's for people who are starting out. Manage your expectations, learn the ropes, because a lot of what you learn in school is not going to be applicable nothing really prepares you for the field. So do lots of internships and stuff like that. So that's if you're still a student. I think if you're mid-career and you want to, and we do get this a lot, we do have a lot of lawyers, people in politics who do want to move into journalism. So I think if you're looking to get into investigative journalism as well, it does take time as well. We never let anybody go into investigative work right off the bat. There's always a lot of other jobs, and some of them is like, again, hugely unglamorous, like transcribing interviews or doing rough cuts of interviews before. So you got to progress and get to that point.
No, thank you. That's great to know. So for students currently exploring this as an option to get into for their university and higher education, manage expectations, you said, learn the ropes, and note that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be all glamorous overnight.
Oh my God, I sound so terrible.
No, you don't. This is great sharing and learning.
But I would really say this though, if you are a student right now, you're not sure whether to go into journalism, I would absolutely recommend it. Because you will be part of a movement that is picking up speed again to really make journalism that line of defense. The war against misinformation is so important. We've seen it in the US, right? We've seen how that has played out. How President Trump has actively used digital media to spread lies and untruths. And for that 5 or 6 years, the past 5 or 6 years, we see these tactics being used around the world. It's growing around the world. People are using social media platforms to spread misinformation. We've seen it in the pandemic with anti-vax movements. So it's everywhere, and it's going to be so much more important, I think, in the years to come. Like the role of the media, people are good. I feel will start to remember that, hey, these guys are the original gatekeepers, right, of information. They are the ones that have devoted their lives, committed their professional careers to deciding what's in the public interest, to decide to help gatekeep that information and put out the truth as best as they can. And by having entrusted that gatekeeping in a way to the social media companies, which is what we've done, right, essentially, we've become slaves to their algorithms. They now feed us information based on their algorithm every single time we open our social media platforms, right? So we have taken that and we have placed it in the hands of these tech companies. And I think the world is starting to realize that's not necessarily a good thing, right? People are starting to realize It has led to more misinformation, it's led to more echo chambers, it has fueled more violence and more anger, because most of the algorithms, they reward anger, they reward conflict. That's what people get addicted to, and keeps you opening your social media apps. So I hope people start to see that, and I think they are, that we need to take that power back and put it in the hands of good, responsible journalists who are accountable for their actions, and whose very professional careers and livelihoods depend on them upholding those standards. So if you're thinking about getting into that field, this is what you're really getting yourself into. You are putting yourselves in the front line of the war against misinformation, and you're going to hold the line together with us. So slightly more inspiring than saying, manage your expectations. And,
Thank you so much, Ian. How would you like our audience today and everybody around us, what would you say to them? You've just spoken about the war against misinformation, but could you also advise a little bit on how people can support journalism, how communities can support journalism, investigative journalists, and why that's so important? And you've already listed the biggest reason to counter misinformation, but what should they be doing at a
Pay for
personal
your
level?
news. Pay for your news. It's as simple as that. Everybody thinks, oh no, news should be free. And I have really people who are really close to me who complain about this. Like, hey, how come your company, why it's a pandemic, they should release all this. Why they still want to have a subscription? Why do I have to pay to read this story? It should be a public service. Yeah, who's paying for that public service, right? Who are paying colleagues or people like me? If you can't put a face to it, put my face to it. I always say that. I always tell people, if you can't put a face on media oppression, if you think that's some far-flung thing that happens like in the Philippines to people like Maria Ressa, who you don't know, or in South America where journalists are killed, or in Indonesia even where journalists are killed, imagine myself or any other journalist that you know, who is paying for our time during a pandemic to go to the front lines, putting our lives at risk to get you that information, to tell you what's going on, and yeah, to hold the government accountable for the decisions they're making during this pandemic that might affect your life. And yet people are saying, no, we shouldn't have to pay these news companies. It just doesn't make sense. So there are many, I've had many awkward conversations like this where people say, hey, this, like, for example, the Star has a paywall now. Somebody's got to pay for it. And if you don't pay for it, somebody else will. That's a line I got from Chuck, from the former editor of Chili Sauce, who's also a huge advocate for the media. It says, if you are not going to pay for your media, somebody else will. And guess who those people are? They're not going to be your friends. They're going to be the millionaires who want to make more money. They are the people in power who want to stay in power at whatever cost. It's not going to be your philanthropists and all. Yeah, there are some who are funding media companies. There are philanthropists who are like, oh, we need a good press, so I'm going to invest money into it. Generally speaking, look around the world, try to dig into who owns media companies, and you'll be surprised. You'll be saddened. And I think even in Malaysia, there's so many issues around media ownership that we need to look into.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Ian, you've spoken about your education pathway. You've spoken how you started off in the practicing journalism, starting from your internship. You've spoken about kind of different projects you worked on. What are the challenges? What are some of the perceptions associated with the field? And you've also highlighted for our audience what the day-to-day grind involves before you get to those big stories and those breakthroughs. In all this time, if I ask you what would be the project you have that's most close to your heart, what would you like to share about that? Or is there a particular area that you would like, that you are maybe currently working on or would like to work on?
It's hard to pick. But I think generally speaking, anything to do with communities that are disadvantaged or marginalized, I feel very strongly about that.
Right.
We've done some pieces on migrant workers who have been treated really, really terribly, who were trafficked to Malaysia. I think those are the stories that kind of bring us back to our calling to be the fourth estate, to speak up on behalf of people who are disadvantaged and to speak to power about these issues. And also because I feel a lot of the issues that we have in the world stem from that lack of empathy and understanding towards people that are different from us, right? People
Yeah.
who are in minorities, who are disadvantaged or marginalized. Those people who have privilege, they don't necessarily understand what they go through, and that leads to a lot of problems. So that lack of empathy is something that we really kind of need to solve.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. Ian, we have from our audience received questions for you. We'd like you to share your insights on them, advise our audience, and share your perspective. Some of our audience members have shared questions for you prior hand, and they're also typing them out in the chat. So I'll read them out to you, and I request if you could take those questions one by one. Let's start with the first one. We have a question. I would love to know more about writing stories beyond the show and tell methods. Tell us how journalism can be varied instead of merely writing articles. Thank you.
Yeah, like I was saying, there are like positive and negative disruptions in the media industry thanks to technology, right? So one of the positives is the storytelling methods. So for example, with Rage, I think one of the first things we did was break out of those traditional formats where it's either text or it's super long documentaries. There was no middle ground. So we started experimenting with new formats that were like maybe 10 minutes, which was really, really short at the time. And then we moved on to tagging on action campaigns. So it becomes much more interactive. I'm not just showing and telling. I'm inviting the audience to kind of be part of this journey, to send a petition, to lobby an MP, to implement like kind of like policy changes in universities against trafficking. So things like that. So you get much more audience involvement thanks to technology. And I think in the past, a lot of times this was seen as, in fact, I did a story on this early on in my career where there's this term called clicktivism, which was kind of, it was kind of derogatory, like to say, young people, all you know how to do is get angry at issues and then you just click and click and click and you never go out and do anything. But now we know how powerful those clicks can be, right? If you're clicking donate, for example, that is powerful. If you're clicking on petitions, that is powerful. If you're clicking on a live stream, you're starting a live stream to talk about these issues, that is powerful. Right. So clicktivism is important. We should reclaim that word. It is powerful. So we keep doing that. We encourage that. And on top of that, we also see a lot of things like we dabbled a bit in like VR storytelling. Some companies have tried gamification. We've done it as well. Like you go to one of our Rage stories where there's an experience where you can play a game to see what would happen if you were a human trafficking victim. So it's kind of like a pick your adventure kind of game. Okay. So, and the game shows that with most decisions you make, you still end up getting trafficked because you are from a marginalized community. You are from a place where you don't have privilege, and you need a degree, and that's where people kind of like the traffickers use that against you. So yeah, so there are a lot of different methods of storytelling, and I believe the sky's the limit. Not all of it works. I think sometimes a lot of media companies tend to try too many fancy things, and sometimes it gets a bit overboard, and people can't relate to it. So there is a movement to go back towards simpler forms of storytelling. I think you'll see a lot of infographics these days on Instagram. I think those are very, very effective as long as they're well researched and they're presented really, really well. So there are lots of methods, but pick what communicates most clearly and most effectively.
And would that be different for different audience groups?
Yeah, I think so. We always tailor our content. That's one thing that we always tell in our like media training sessions. that every social media account platform has a different target audience and has a different user experience. So you need to create content based on that. So if you're talking like something like TikTok, it's much more interactive. You want to build in that interactivity into your content. You want people to be able to do a duet out of it, for example, or yeah, I'm not great at TikTok, but some of the applications are very exciting, like in terms of how you can use TikTok. And obviously that crowd will be much younger. So the tone of your message you have to suit that audience as well. And I don't mean by dumbing it down, but really just speaking in a language, in a visual language, or just actual language that relates to them.
Thank you so much. You've shared, I mean, in response to the question from our audience today, from our audience member today, you've spoken about varying it, experimenting with different formats. You've spoken about the initial action campaigns. You've spoken about VR storytelling, gamification, and then you've also highlighted how it can be done because there are so many different audience groups as per different platform, allowing all this different experimentation and variety. Another question that we received from our audience is investigative journalism a dangerous and stressful job? If yes, what makes you keep going despite the danger and challenges?
Yeah, I think any form of almost any form of journalism can be dangerous, right? When you're trying to hold power to account, when you're trying to expose government wrongdoing, there is always the chance that it can turn at a split second, that one story you do or one document you uncover changes your life.
Right.
So it is dangerous and it is very stressful. Yeah, myself and my team, we've gone through that. The nights where you just you sleepless nights, and you're just not sure if you release the story, what's it gonna mean. We take all the steps imaginable, right, to keep ourselves safe, and we all the security measures, but at the end of the day, you never really know. You just never know. So what keeps us going is, like I said before, we are holding the line for truth and justice. We don't want to, again, I don't want to self-aggrandize. It still feels weird saying it sometimes. But I've heard Maria Ressa say it firsthand after she won the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm going to claim that forever. I'm going to be like, no, yes, we are. We are here holding the line. So there are some dangers. We do our best to mitigate the risk. We do a lot, and that keeps us going. But internally, obviously, the saying is always, no story is worth dying for. Okay, you live to tell another story. If it's too dangerous, hold on. Find a different way to tell it, find a different way to approach it, and then live to tell another story, and hopefully you will get to that point of solving that issue. So the risks are very, very real, and it's never. A lot of people worry. A lot of people think that the risks are physical, because you do hear a lot of these horror stories, like especially in the Philippines, in Indonesia, quite close to home. You have journalists who are killed for investigating. Like people in power, investing criminals and stuff like that. But generally speaking, so while those are true, they do happen. Generally speaking, our threats are very often legal and financial.
Okay.
So you get a lot of people in power who have lots of money to pay lots of lawyers to keep you busy all day, to dry up your legal fund. To the point where you're not sure whether it's worth continuing the story. So that's actually much more common than people think. Okay.
Let's go to the next question, Ian. We have received a few more from our audience. So we have an audience member saying, "Hi, Ian. I'm a big fan of Rage and your work. I come from a media background and I'm thinking of changing career into journalism. Will getting a master's in literature help me with that?"
I think it won't hurt. We do get people from a lot of different backgrounds, not necessarily in journalism. Like I said, we get people with who have been in law, or political science, who want to be journalists. So I don't think it'll hurt. But I don't think in particular writing skills are important, but they're not everything. I think especially in Malaysia, people tend to have this idea that journalism equals writing. It's more about effective storytelling, whatever the medium is. So yeah, I'm not sure. It won't hurt. It's not gonna discount you from the role. But personally, when I hire someone, I want to look at their portfolio. That's the first thing I look for.
Okay.
Have you published any articles? Have you done internships? Have you volunteered? Do you have your own like publishing platforms on Instagram? Like, do you run your own? Yeah. So that's what I really look for.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Another question that we received from the audience is, can you describe some of the benefits to your writing style with your exposure while studying in the UK? So
I don't think there was a huge benefit there.
Okay.
Because like I said, it really is about storytelling. And everywhere you go, I think the writing style can be slightly different. Every different country or even different publications you work for will have different styles. So I mentioned like chili sauce earlier, right? Obviously, their writing style, if you had studied in the UK, would have meant nothing to them. You're like, no, you need to write like a Malaysian, use a bit of Manglish because that's our style. And even between like American and British like media, you do see a bit of a difference in writing style sometimes. So I don't think there is a particular benefit from studying in the UK. Like I mentioned earlier, the benefit really is in seeing how the media operates and taking the good parts of that and applying it back home.
Okay, so related to the same question, if you had to give one advice to a student or a beginner in the field of improving their style of storytelling or style of writing, what would that be, other than the platforms used?
Empathy is the key.
Okay.
Always put yourselves in the shoes of the audience. Sounds simple, but it is a habit. It is a skill. Empathy is a skill. If you don't practice it, you'll lose it. And that's how you end up with like dictators, right? Or you sometimes you wonder, why would someone do that, right? And we've asked ourselves that question so many times. Why is this human trafficker doing this? Does he not realize he's destroying thousands of lives? Literally, he's ruined thousands of lives. He's caused untold suffering. And he's sitting across, and we have coffee and tea with these people undercover, right? And he's just sitting across there talking like it's nothing. Right. And we realize that it's because somewhere along the line, they've lost their sense of empathy. They don't feel for these people anymore. They don't see themselves in the shoes of their victims anymore.
Okay.
So that's super important in, I think, beyond journalism. But if you want to be a more effective storyteller as well, so empathy obviously has many, many benefits, right? It makes you a better leader, makes you a better communicator as well. So if you understand how people will read your story, for example, then you realize, oh, I'm not writing this in a way that's very accessible. Or you understand how people use a certain app. You're putting yourself, if I put myself in their shoes, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to check this first. I'm going to scroll this way. I'm going to watch this video for 5 seconds, and then I'll make a decision. So if you put yourself through that journey in that person's shoes, you'll become a much more effective storyteller.
Okay, that's good advice. Thank you. We have another question related to preparing as a student. So what are the types of courses that can lead me to become a journalist? If I don't have one, how can I work full-time as a journalist or impact investigative journalist?
I'm assuming you mean if you don't have the relevant qualifications, how can you still do it? I think there's not an issue at all. I would say there are a lot of people who are now independent journalists. There are pros and cons to that. So independent journalist means you're not attached to any media company and you're publishing things on your own. So it's a movement that's starting to pick up in Malaysia as well, where it's just people who start a Twitter account and then they go out and do some of their own reporting on their own. Maybe sometimes they have a small team with them, 5 or 6 people. And there are pros and cons. So we've seen some really, really good stuff, right? You see people like the Loud Asians, not exactly journalism, but close enough. You see like Missy Solidarity, it's really interesting stuff, really, really good work. So you can do that on your own. So that's one way you can work towards being an impact or investigative journalist. Start your own platforms, do your own reporting, and learn as you go, which is a dangerous thing to say because journalism is something that does require a bit of training, and there's a lot of responsibility and accountability that comes with that. Having said that, qualifications, like I was mentioning earlier in response to the previous question as well, it's not, I think a lot of media companies, they won't be too concerned about that. So if you have something related, a course that is kind of mildly relevant, you still have a chance, as long as you can prove that I have a body of work, I've published independently, or I have taken a few internships, I've taken some short courses on, then I think you'll still be able to get into some media companies these days.
Okay, thank you. We have a question. How often do you use social media, and do you use it to identify new stories?
Okay, I like this question because there are media companies out there that I really, really have a bone to pick with, because their entire operation is dedicated to finding stories off social media. Nothing wrong with that, but if that's the only thing you're gonna do, that gets dangerous, right? Because you're just trawling social media for viral stuff and republishing it on your platforms and making money off of that, right? So it becomes very money driven, because whatever's going to bring you clicks onto your website, you will run that story. You don't care about social justice. You don't care about defending truth. You care about the story that comes in that that's going to get you lots of clicks, and which means that the advertisers are going to pay you a lot of money. So that's not great. It's not ethical, and it will slowly lead to like a lot of problems in the industry later on, where and you start to lose trust from the audience as well. People, the general public, will start to think, where is the real journalism? How many times have I heard that? I've seen comments like that on social media. They're like, journalism in Malaysia, journalists are terrible. They only do stories to get clicks. Well, it's because we have a lot of platforms like that kind of add to the noise on social media, right? Where they're pushing out lots of these sensationalist, viral crap that they've spent. So the real journalism, the real people who go to see the floods, for example, the people who are doing investigative work, like some of the investigative journalists I've worked with, who've just done incredibly brave work, who go to the Orang Asli villages, to the blockades, to look into land rights issues, to look into illegal logging, no matter how dangerous it is. Those stories get lost in this sea of viral. So that's why we need to put an end to that. Empower journalists. Oh, sorry. Get on with this. Really sorry. Recognize the role that journalism has to play in society. Empower the journalists, and you will see things get better. But if we keep not supporting journalism, if we keep putting our personal habits don't change, we keep seeking out viral stories, and we don't pay for our news, then you will get the media in this country that you deserve. You are the one. You will have inadvertently caused. It will be a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of us saying that the media is terrible.
Thank you so much, Ian. You've shared so many insights. You've taken live questions. Unfortunately, we're short of time, and we would have to conclude the discussion for today, but it's been fascinating to listen to your experiences. Before we move towards closing the session for today, for our audience on the screen, we would like to share our feedback form. We request you to please share your suggestions, your questions, your feedback on how you would like the Smart Talk series to progress. Our Malaysian and UK alumni that you would like to hear from, or particular sectors and professions that you'd like to learn more about. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, this is all that we have time for today, and we have to bring this session to a close. On behalf of Study UK and British Council, I'd like to thank Ian Yee for his valuable time and his sharing today. I have found it most inspirational, and I'm sure our audience have enjoyed it and have found your advice helpful. For our audience, thank you for joining us today. Do stay tuned for the next Smart Talk webinar series sponsored by Qatar Airways. It's taking place every Saturday at 4 p.m. and our next session is with a talented artist advocating environmental issues using arts, Celine Bricker. Spread the word, share it with your friends, and we look forward to seeing you with us in the next Smart Talk series, and where we will be with Celine Bricker. Finally, if you do have questions and comments or feedback, please do share via email and on all our British Council Study UK social media channels. We'd be more than happy to get back to you. Final thank you, Ian. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to listen to you and to learn more about your experiences. And a huge thank you to all our audience today for your contributions and your questions. And I hope you have a great rest of the Saturday and weekend. Thank you.